Goldphyre Resources ASX GPH is an Australian explorer focused on advancing its key project, the Lake Wells Potash project in Western Australia. Joining me via Skype is Executive Chairman Matt Shackleton. Welcome, Matt.
Hello, Tim. Good to see you again.
Now, we spoke just only a few weeks ago prior to this drilling campaign. You've just released some information to the market about a successful campaign intersecting basal sands. Now, quickly, can you explain what a basal sand is and why that's important?
Sure. The basal sands just refer to the base or basal layer at the bottom of the sediments that are sitting in our paleo channel. And a paleo channel is just a technical term for an ancient river. So what the Lake Wells Potash project is a paleo channel hosted brine potash project, which is just a river, and we are endeavouring to sink bores into the river and pump the brine out. And the significance of us finding this basal sand layer and indeed finding quite a nice width of the layer at the bottom of the sediments is that sands are quite porous. Generally speaking, sand will give up the brine that sits within it quite easily. And you can traditionally abstract, between 43 and 47% of the brines contained within that basal sand layer using bore pumps. So the real relevance to us in finding that basal sand layer is it confirms to us that the brine, which we already know is there, will be pumpable. We will be able to abstract that brine from the aquifer in the paleo channel. So that's the real significance of it.
So if I understand correctly, you've got an ancient riverbed called the paleo channel. Now, in the recent campaign, you've gone down with the drilling and you've actually hit the rock bottom. So it doesn't go below that because you're saying that the basal sands have trapped all that brine material above the solid rock in the bottom of the old paleo channel river system.
That's right. So this is the first campaign where we've actually been able to intersect the basement of the riverbed or the basement of the paleo channel. Previous drilling by Goldphyre and also previous workers, we certainly weren't using a drill rig that was powerful enough to drill down to what we now know to be about 175 metres deep. The drill rigs we were using previously we felt they needed to be light enough to move around on the Salt Lake surface, and therefore we sacrificed a little bit of power. What we've done on this campaign we've just concluded is we've used a much bigger machine with much more power that has been able to drill all the way down to the basement rock. So the riverbed is a rock, and on top of that rock sits various different types of looser material. Basal sand, we've got some clay, and then we've got some other sand sitting above that. So that's the aquifer, or the resource that we're attempting to measure, is all contained within this very ancient riverbed, which in our case extends, we think, for about 60 kilometres. 60 kilometres,
and are you expecting these similar widths in the drilling campaign that's just coming up?
That's right, we are. We will be drilling through to probably the third week of May at this stage, and we're mobilising in another type of drill rig which is going to be able to drill down to the bedrock. We'll then we'll be casing those holes. We'll be putting PVC pipe down those holes. Those holes will stay open, and we'll be monitoring those holes over the next several months. But what we are endeavouring to do with the next stage of this campaign is to drill the length of this paleo channel, again with the expectation that we'll identify these basal sands at the bottom of the sediments.
Now, following the next drilling campaign, I think you may have mentioned you'd be in a position to produce a resource estimate in the JORC code.
That's right, yeah. So we're all of the data that we've been generating to date is being directed towards our maiden resource estimate. So we are aiming to release an inferred resource on the Lake Wells Potash project in June. So at this stage, drilling's been going very well for us, and we're on target to deliver that.
Now, what kind of mine life scenario? Say, once you get this resource and that's sorted initially, what are you looking at in terms of annual production?
Well, Goldphyre's ambition has always been to get what, relatively speaking, would be considered a modest project, but we're aiming to produce somewhere between 75,000 tonnes and 100,000 tonnes of sulphate of potash per year. Now, the exploration target that we published at the beginning of March, if we a specific yield estimate of our exploration target, then we've got potentially up to 23 million tonnes of contained SOP. Now, again, if we're successful in developing an operation that's producing, for argument's sake, 100,000 tonnes of SOP per annum, you can see that the mine life expectancy on this project is very long. And I suppose that leads us to the conclusion that developing a very large resource for the simple sake of developing a large resource is perhaps not where we ought to be directing our efforts. We've consciously decided that we'll direct our efforts towards identifying, measuring and pushing through to development a core high-quality resource. Again, because mine life is going to be very long on these projects when they get into production. So it's more a question of, in our view, the economics behind the operation and also the CAPEX associated with getting the operation going.
Let's talk about the economics of the operation for a second. We spoke last time about the actual product to the gate. And sulphate of potash is used in farming and growing vegetables and food crops. But the alternatives in Australia right now are a potassium chloride, which is a salt-based product, whereas the sulphate-based potash doesn't have that, leave that salinity in the soil. So that makes it a premium fertiliser product.
Yeah, that's still the case, and that's always been the case. SOP, or sulphate of potash, has traditionally traded at anywhere up to 50, 60, 70% premium to the muriate of potash, which is the potassium chloride product. Particularly in Australia, where SOP has traditionally been applied to those higher margin crops, so the horticultural crops, those crops that can carry a higher cost fertiliser, and it traditionally has been priced out of the reach of the broad acre farming community. So all those cereal croppers through the Western Australian wheat belt, South Australia, northern New South Wales, southwestern Queensland and so on, all of those farmers traditionally haven't used SOP because of the price. Notwithstanding that, the application of potassium chloride to a lot of those soil types in those regions can have, over the longer term, a harmful effect on the yield that that ground can produce. So SOP, a domestic operation of SOP, supplying Australian farmers, would benefit the farmers' economics and also the ground. So the farmers' paddocks will be able to yield better and for longer using SOP.
All right, we've talked about what's in the ground, we've talked about where it winds up. Now let's talk about the piece in the middle, the infrastructure. I understand you'll be utilising existing infrastructure, you have access to a railhead, so it seems a fairly simple matter of getting that product to market.
Yeah, well, we're very fortunate in that the Lake Wells Potash project is close to infrastructure. So we have a road that's accessible with sort of triple road trains have been using it right up to the foot of the project. So at this stage, we envisage utilising all of that infrastructure when our operation gets going. The Lake Wells homestead is right next to our project. So from an exploration perspective, we've been able to work with the station owners easily and use their homestead to house all of our exploration teams and so on. The project's about 300 kilometres from Leonora, and there is a bulk rail terminal at Leonora, that's been freighting out bulk nickel concentrates for the last 12 years or so, I think it is. So we do have access to infrastructure handy to the project. We're about 500 kilometres northeast of Kalgoorlie. So again, relative to the other peer companies in the brine potash space in Australia, our location and our logistics are very favourable to our development, which again feeds directly into us estimating relatively speaking, a modest CAPEX. So we are targeting something of less than $100 million to get our operation going.
For investors watching, Goldphyre Resources is listed on the Australian Stock Exchange under the ticker code GPH. I'd like to thank Matt for coming on via Skype and look forward very much to hearing the next piece of news that's coming out.
Thanks a lot, Tim. Good to speak to you again.